Good morning. My name is Alicia Gutierrez. I'm with the California Energy Commission, and we are actually just hosting the hosting facility for this workshop today. So I'm going to quickly go over some housekeeping and then turn it over to the staff with the Strategic Growth Council. So for those in the room, the restroom facilities are out the door to the left, and then we also have a cafe on the second floor atrium area, and if there is an emergency, you will follow staff to the park across the street. It's kitty corner from our building. Just follow staff if an alarm sounds. For those online, we are running through WebEx. The meeting is being recorded. And if you have questions, we would like you to enter them into the chat function on WebEx, and we will field those questions after the presentation. So with that, I will introduce Ina Lupin from the Strategic Growth Council. Thank you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out, for those of you who are in the room and also those of you who are joining us via WebEx. We're really excited to be here for the first round of funding for our climate change research program. So just to give a little background, this program is administered by the Strategic Growth Council, which brings together state agencies and departments to coordinate activities that support sustainable communities. We emphasize strong economies, social equity, and environmental stewardship, and have awarded over $465 million to date. This climate change research program is a competitive grant program, and it's funded through the California Climate Investments, and so it'll be approximately $11 million in total. And this work supports research on reducing carbon emissions, including clean energy, adaptation, and resiliency, with an emphasis on California. And then just quickly to go through the program timeline, proposal submissions will be due April 13th of this year, followed by our staff funding recommendations will be July 20th of 2018. This year. Our Strategic Growth Council will then vote on project awards July 31st. And then we will begin working with researchers to draft grant agreements on August 1st. Lastly, the closeout date is June 30th, 2021, which means that all funds would need to be expended by that time. And with that, I am going to introduce Elizabeth Grassi, who is our program lead, and we'll go into a bit more of the specifics of the program. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out for this. What I'd like to do just briefly is do a quick overview of what's in the solicitation itself, spend a lot more time talking about the submission process, and then saving as much time as we can for question and answers. If you have clarifying questions, please let me know right now. Otherwise, we'll just wait till the end to get into real specific questions you might have about the submission and review process. See if I can do this. Okay. So our program has two different types of project awards. We have the project grants, which are more narrowly focused on a research question or a group of research questions that could be looked at from like a one or two lead personnel that really, again, just focuses in on something and has kind of short-term outcomes, like 3 years or less. You would actually have the answer to those questions. It kind of stops there. There is a partnership component, but it's not as intense as the partnership grants. We'd like to see at least one partner for each of the proposals. I'm going to step back because I'm just spitting into this. And so we'll only do up to 10 projects, and we'll go anywhere between $100,000 and $1 million for these projects. And just to kind of back up, the reason why we're limiting the number of awards is just capacity within the council. We've normally had other departments implement our programs, but we're going to self-implement this one. So we really have to worry about capacity and being able to responsibly manage the awards that we give away. So with that, our second type of project is a partnership grant. That's really kind of a larger $1 to $4 million grant or research project that's really going to incorporate multiple campuses, centers, collaboratives that would have a very dynamic, robust system of engagement and partnering, seeing some sort of a model that looks at a research approach that really infuses kind of outside input into your research process throughout the project. So it's a little bit different from kind of what you normally do with research projects, but we're really excited about it, and that's one of the reasons we received money, because we are this coordination unit within the state government trying to bring people together, and really we'd like to see non-traditional partners help to inform how research is done. So eligibility, we only have 4 types of institutions that are eligible to be the lead applicant. That is University of California, California State Universities, federally funded national laboratories that are located within California, and then private nonprofit colleges and universities also within California. So while we really want to see a lot of other folks as sub-recipients, we have limited this to these 4 institutions. Oh, and I should say, let's see if I can go back. No? In addition, we do have one other eligibility process. So if you're a PI, you can be a PI or principal investigator on 2 projects. However, you can be on additional projects. And kind of looking in this room, I know some folks who do modeling and things like that, where they might have a small piece of a larger project, but they wouldn't necessarily be a principal investigator. And so that's why we're eliminating it to 2 as PI, but you can also participate in additional projects. Okay, so did I miss? So our threshold requirements for this program, and you'll see, really good with my piece, you will see when you're going through the submission questionnaire that we do have a section on threshold requirements, and you will see these listed out. So we have 7 program goals, and your submission has to address in general terms how you are aligning with or advancing all 7 of those goals. It also talks about facilitating GHG reduction, emission reduction, and that doesn't have to be a direct one-to-one quantitative alignment, but more generally talking about how the project really will over time help advance emission reductions. So we're looking for more of a qualitative kind of down the line view of how your project will contribute to that goal. The benefit of low income or disadvantaged communities, those are our AB 535 and 1550 requirements. Again, that's not a one-to-one. You have to be able to do a direct alignment. We really want to hear you talk about how this research, again, we're talking about outcome-based research that leads to climate action. And so kind of thinking about it under that context, how the findings from your research could over time really provide benefits to these communities. So the other thing is this partnership feature or meaningful engagement. That's really key. We really want to see both your traditional partners that you would use as researchers and non-traditional partners. Again, with the whole disadvantaged and low-income communities, as well as the vulnerability question that comes up with adaptation. We really want to see this research including and informing those stakeholders or communities that would either benefit or would have a stake in the outcomes of the research. And then we have the 4 2018 priority investment areas, so you have to at least focus on one of those 4 areas. And the 4 areas are supporting and protecting vulnerable communities from the impacts of climate change, accelerating and supporting transition to climate-smart communities, integrating land use conservation and management into California climate change programs, and increasing data accessibility and planning support for state, local, and regional climate planning. So with those, as you can tell, a couple are around adaptation, a couple are around GHG reduction or carbon mitigation, and then I think the data accessibility is really key as we look at adaptation and resiliency. And I just want to stop and say there that one of our 7 goals really is about aligning with state data, and so as you know, the 4th climate change assessment is coming out, and so we would recommend that you look at that to see projections, protocols, scenarios, things that are used in that, and make sure that your work is aligning with that. So with program goals, these are the program goals. The first one really has to do with GHG emissions reduction and the California climate goals, which are represented in the governor's 6 pillars on climate change. The second one is to advance low-income and disadvantaged communities to make sure that they're being equitably treated as we think about adaptation and resiliency. This third one is about augment, build connections, and fill gaps across current research programs. As you may know, that many of our departments already have research programs. They're not competitive programs. We have a different dynamic, but ARB, or California Air Resources Board, the Energy Commission, Caltrans, Public Utilities Commission, CAL FIRE, a lot of them have these research programs. We want to make sure we're not duplicating those programs, but we're building on the work we've already done over time. I would suggest anybody go to cal/adapt.org. We do have a list of past climate programs, at least a partial list, and then Caltrans has their division of research and innovation, which is another good place to look for past programs, research that's been done around climate. So you might want to look at those too for that. The 4th goal is really kind of the purpose of our program, and that's to look at outcome-based research that's linked to practical climate action. That's really where our program is a little bit different, and it's nuanced compared to the other programs that are happening. SGC was given the money because for a lot of reasons, but among those is that we're actually doing these implementation programs around carbon mitigation. Also that we really focus on Senate Bill 375 and regional targets. That was kind of why we were created. So there's a lot of things that have us focus more on communities and land use and transportation and all these different areas that are more complex than just kind of a carbon mitigation question, and so that's what we're trying to achieve here, is having research that's outcome-based and having research that can directly link and inform people to take climate action. The model meaningful engagement is another key component of our program, and I think I've talked about it a little bit, but especially if we look at the investment plan, we talk about non-traditional partners and kind of moving beyond what researchers tend to do with their approach, having it very limited, a limited group of people involved in it. We really want to open that up. We also want to see how we can translate really good research into state policy and how we can bring state policymakers into the research process so they better understand and apply, again, that research that's taking place. The common research platform is, again, that idea of looking at the data sets, the scenarios, the trajectories that the state is using around climate so that we're all on the same track and people can translate different research projects in a way that's more comprehensive. And then finally, leverage and complement existing research funding and policy innovations to accelerate the research. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but we really do want to see, like, we've noticed in a lot of other programs, you'll ask a really good question, but there's not funding to do kind of a nuance off that question, or maybe you're doing something that's more hard research and you'd like to do some behavioral work around that or something like that. So really thinking about where are those gaps just because of how the funding is organized, that you really can't move forward in the research that's been done. And so we're hoping that this can kind of fill in those gaps. Okay, proposal evaluation. So we have 3 phases to how we will review and evaluate submitted projects or submitted research proposals. The first one will just be a simple screening for completeness. A lot of that will be looking at making sure all of the components are submitted, also looking at the questions on the online questionnaire about the threshold requirements and things like that. So we'll just be kind of going through and making sure that everything is where it needs to be. The second phase of this is a technical review, and we will have a steering committee made of outside experts who will actually be reviewing all the submitted projects that are screened, and they will be looking at technical merits and meaningful engagement. These will not be scored on a point system, but really that kind of excellent through, I guess, needs work or poor. So we have these 5 criteria, but they'll basically be giving an overall score based on that. Once we get those back, we have an interagency committee who will review the ones that receive the higher scores, kind of very good and excellent. And they'll be looking at a couple of different criteria to make sure that we have a diverse and comprehensive suite of projects. We don't want to have like 7 of our 10 projects all be on one area of research. We really want to make sure that we're looking at our policy considerations and making sure that we've comprehensively addressed what we're trying to achieve. So technical review. So here are some of the merits. It's just that we're advancing the state's climate goals, that we're using state-of-the-art methodology, that we're applying approaches that are innovative and new, that we're meeting the goals that address and the needs that are listed, that it's not just research by itself, but it's outcome-based, and we're really looking at who would be using this research and how it would be applied. Engaging stakeholders in the planning process, and that the investigators are qualified to execute the activity. In addition, and you'll see this in the narrative, we do have this meaningful engagement piece. So as you kind of create your narrative and you're talking about the technical merits and how you're going to approach this and the methodology you're using, we'd really like to see how you've developed partnerships and how you will be engaging with those partners and with, a larger community throughout each phase of your research. So rather than just saying, yeah, I'm going to do the research and then I'm going to present, we really want to see as you're designing your research how you're using these partnerships, how you're informing people, how you're getting input back. So it really is this idea of kind of a second phase of your narrative that kind of talks about here's how I'm going to do it, and then, or how it's going to be done. And then here's how the roles and responsibilities of our partners and of stakeholders and our approach to the research. So with that, it is this idea of engaging not just traditional partners, but non-traditional partners, consulting them on design and translation, dissemination of the research, advancing climate goals with these engaged audiences, providing assistance data from your research to help them with whatever they're trying to achieve around climate goals, and just establishing multi-stakeholder and institutional partnerships. So that's in a nutshell. So then the programmatic review is this third phase, and it's really going to focus on kind of more of an internal review from the state. And we'll be looking at 3 different areas. The first one is kind of this project management, which is just kind of the general, do you have the capacity, have you set up systems to be able to manage the project, to do your QC, making sure things are done, controlling your costs. Those sorts of things. Past performance is one that if your principal investigators have been involved in state research in the past, to just kind of let us know so we can make sure that, they haven't had issues in the past with doing their reporting and submission and that sort of thing. And then policy considerations is that idea again of we will be looking at what we need to achieve in this first iteration of the program as far as having a diverse set of projects, having a diverse set of researchers, looking at different questions within those 4 priority areas, not just focusing on one priority area. So these are just some of this is just really how we'll be looking at that, depending on need. You know, because this is the first time we've done this, we don't know if we're going to get 20 applications or 200. And so we just really wanted to make sure, based on that and really not understanding yet how and who's going to respond to this, and because we've tried to create this really broad and flexible program because this is such a huge area, that we really wanted to have a way to kind of take everything that's really good and kind of determine the best way to invest this initial set of funding. So these are some of the things we'll be looking at with that. So the solicitation process. So like I mentioned, we will be actually implementing as well as awarding the program. So your project managers will be SGC staff, and we'll be doing kind of orientation meetings with researchers, reviewing project or progress and stuff like that. So that's a little bit different. We're also using an online system for receiving all of your proposals, and that's through the Department of Water Resources has the grant system. It is online now. We got it up yesterday, so feel free to use it. There is online, if you go to the site, there is a video tutorial to help you with it. There's also a user guide, so there's a lot of information, and they have a help desk. And Sarisha's here from the Department of Water Resources who can answer any questions you might have about the system. But we will be, one of the things I did want to kind of mention here in the whole process is our staff will be available anytime between now and the submission date to really help you with any questions that you have. And then Sarisha and his colleagues over at DWR are there to help you with the submission process. So I wanted to let you know that. The evaluation process will take place from April through June because we do have this 2-phase process. It's pretty intense, so we'll be doing all of that before the July 20th date, which is our legally mandated date to post any information about votes that will take place by the council on the 31st. And then that list will be provided to the council. It will be a set of recommendations of awards that will be no more than 15 projects that we'll tell the council what we think should be funded with this money. So components of the submission. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at our solicitation process. There are a number of pieces to it. We've never done a research program before at the council. We've tended to do more implementation programs, so we were really trying to look at processes used by our fellow departments here, also places like NSF and NOAA, and places where we think researchers are more familiar. So we're trying to kind of create a more familiar process for all of you that would be workable. So we do have a submission questionnaire, and we can go through that if you'd like, but it's pretty straightforward. There are 2 sections that DWR mandates as part of their system, and then we have, I think, 4 sections, thresholds, partnerships, project summary, and attachments. I think those are the 4 areas that we did. So the submission questionnaire is really a place where we can do the screening of the project, so we don't have to be reading through a bunch of PDFs, but we can just really efficiently do that, and also so that we can collect data, which we think is really important as we go through different iterations of this program. We can kind of see the types of projects that you're doing. We can have the abstracts in a database so that we can pull information from it. The project budget, there is a template available at the grant site if you want to use it. If you don't want to use it, if you have, like I know different institutions have their own internal templates that their offices of research like to use, and as long as it has all the information that we ask for in the template and the budget justification, we're fine with you using your own budget forms. You don't have to use ours. The scope of work is just a graphical depiction of your project narrative, so we can kind of see the milestones and key dates and things like that. It does have to have a timeline. It does have to have deliverables and tasks and that sort of thing. The project narrative is really that key piece of information that will help our technical review panel or advisory committee, I have to use the right nomenclature, will help them to kind of evaluate your project. And so there will be kind of not more than 10 pages. It will include a description of the project, the technical merits, and the meaningful engagement pieces of that. Biographical sketches should be no more than 2 pages for each senior personnel. I did get a call, and we will also allow you to separately do your collaborations and affiliation separately, like you would do on an NSF proposal. I guess in 2017 they kind of changed those rules where rather than having each biographical sketch have all of your collaborations and affiliations, you can kind of do a separate document that has everything for everybody on that, so that doesn't have to be in your 2-page sketch anymore. So we're just trying to make it a smoother transition and to use tools that you're all used to using with other research programs. The partnership overview is a little bit different. It is one of those things where we want to kind of get from you a better understanding of how you will be engaging the partners that you've listed in your program. We've kind of left that open in a way that we do want to see roles and responsibilities based on how formal these partnerships are. You may want to include more information. Again, this I think is another key part as you're getting your technical evaluation. I think it will be really helpful for that advisory committee to really see how you see this group integrating into the actual research that's taking place. We'll allow up to 7 letters of support. You can have more, you just can't submit them. The more the merrier, but we just wanted to kind of keep that within. We don't want somebody having to read 30 letters of support for each project because everyone's just asking everybody to support them. So we'd really like to see those key support letters that are most helpful to understanding how the project will lead to climate action. The summary of prior state funding research is again kind of going back to that question, have you as a researcher participated in projects in the past with state government over the last 3 to 5 years? It's just a basic, here are the projects I did, here's the start and end date, and here's a contact person, just something very direct so we can kind of check on if there were any issues in the past. And then just references and literature citation, if you need extra space for it, you can add that here. It's definitely not a necessary piece of the submission process. And I talked a little bit about the narrative. Again, I think the research merits are pretty much what you're used to seeing: significance, importance, innovation, novelty, broader impacts, feasibility, resources and timeline, investigator partners, and impacts and outcomes. And then again, that meaningful engagement piece is where you kind of go back through and really discuss how through your description and research merits, you will be improving research quality, validity, and sensitivity through partnerships and outreach or engagement. What is meaningful engagement, and what sort of capacity have you developed to actually make that happen? What is the structure you'll use? What is innovative or original about how you're doing this compared to other research that's been done? And then what are the impacts, expected impacts and outcomes? So with that, we just thought we would start the question and answer process with some questions we've already received, just to kind of go through some basic information. I think the first one is, people have asked, well, you have this research investment plan and you have the solicitation, and kind of explain that. And the research investment plan is guidance for the overall program, not just the solicitation, but just overall what we're trying to achieve. And it was in the legislation that we had to have this plan that kind of that states everything. So you'll see, for example, in the investment plan that we have 5 priority areas, not 4. We're just not funding all 5 in this round of solicitations. And the solicitation really directs applicants on how to apply for this round of funding. So it's very specific to this round. If we receive money in a different year, we would do a new solicitation that would really be focused on that funding. Graduate student fees, yes, you can include those. And again, it goes back because our template doesn't lay it out specifically, but if you have a template for your budget that does, feel free to use that. We will say also, I had a question about, well, if you want to stop the funding in March 2021, what about that spring semester? And yes, we will pay the RUG fees for that last semester. A submission questionnaire. Somebody asked if they had to fill it all out. And you'll see when you go through the questionnaire now that it's online that most of the questions are required. There are a couple optional ones, but yes, you wouldn't have a completed submission packet without completing that questionnaire totally. Defining vulnerability for climate adaptation. So a question that we got was, how is vulnerable communities different, or is it different from low-income and disadvantaged communities? So disadvantaged or low-income communities, again, is in the it's in the code for the climate change investment programs, which is all the money that comes from the cap and trade auction proceeds, all goes into the climate change or California Climate Investment Program. And so part of that program says we have to serve or look at benefits to low-income and disadvantaged communities. The disadvantaged communities are looked at from Cal Virus Screen. We're on version 3 right now. Low income is really through the housing and community development programs income levels that they create, and so there are places you can go, and we've noted them here to get that information. So every project has to look at those questions, and so that's a question just from a threshold perspective. The question on vulnerable communities really has to do with adaptation. I think that was research priority number 1 in the solicitation. And it really is this idea of who is vulnerable around adaptation, questions about climate adaptation. And we would suggest that researchers who are going to tackle that question for their proposal is to look at our Safeguarding California 2018 update. It really does talk about vulnerable populations, and our steering committee will be familiar with, that is our climate adaptation strategy for the state of California. So again, going back to that aligning with state policy and processes, that would be what you would look at when you're thinking about vulnerability. So with that, I think, I don't know if you want to manage the question part, but that's where we're at. So thank you.
So I think we're going to start with questions. I think we're going to start with questions in the room first, and then we'll go to questions from WebEx, which thanks. If anyone has any questions in the room.
And for those in the room, if you can just come up to the mic, you press the button to ask your question and communicate, and then turn it off after you ask your question, please.
Hi, Laura Podolsky with UCITS. Thanks for holding the workshop. So I have quite a few questions, and hopefully a lot of people in this room have these too. So in reviewing the grant, I was hoping that you could expand on what you see as the center proposals a little bit more. So for the scope of work, for example, it's very straightforward and clear on how you would set that up for a specific project. But if you're proposing a larger center proposal, how do you see that scope of work? And for example, is it for specific projects that might be under the larger umbrella of the center? Is it more of just the overall scope of work for the center at large, talking about our main components and how we're going to deliver that? And then this question also feeds into that, so you can just, maybe I'll ask it now. And also, how do you see for the center proposal in working with SGC in defining what the center does? I think in the investment plan it mentioned something about the centers, the SGCC's a close partnership with the centers in defining the research program. So to what degree do you want the center programs to actually define a research specific projects, since we'll be starting this December? And to what degree does SGC would like to work with the centers in defining that program? So I'm just understanding the level of detail on what you want the center proposals, the level of detail to be submitted.
Great, thank you. So I think, again, like I said earlier, this is a new program and we're trying to be really broad and flexible. And I think with the partnership grants, that's going to be always a work in project. But just generally from the solicitation perspective, I think the scope of work in the project narrative would be a more looking at the topics and what you're trying to achieve versus saying we're going to do these 7 projects on these things. So I think what we really want to hear is what you're trying to tackle as a collaborative that you couldn't do individually as researchers. So we're coming together to really hear the questions we have been looking at, and here's how this investment can fill in gaps or really look at a more holistic way of thinking about these issues or these questions. I know somebody had said, do you have to do one research question, or could it be like a research topic or something? And I don't think you have to focus on really, really defined questions like we tend to do in research, but really think about it more broadly as, you know, there's a topic area. So like with communities, it might be kind of this vulnerability question. And so just kind of saying, here's a topic and here's some of the key issues we'd like to look at, I think is the way. I think with interaction with the council itself, that's a really good question, and I think it's a question that we're trying to delve into a little bit more. Like I said, we're a really small staff, and so, you know, to really play a major part for staff wouldn't be good, but we do have the steering committee, so we'll start to think as we work with them if, you know, we could have members of that committee help play a really integral role in these larger grants that we give out, or maybe some of our key staff from our member agencies. So depending on what kind of work you're doing, maybe we would have some research staff from ARB work with you, or Caltrans or something like that. So it is a work in progress of how we see that integration happening, but we would like to make sure that folks that do research in state government are really kind of sewn into how things are happening, and it can inform kind of the other research that we're doing. Does that help?
Yeah, that's helpful. So in the scope of work and in the project narrative, just more focusing on the main thrusts of a center proposal, and under those thrusts, how we would propose to address that area through, and sample questions would be helpful,
and how this is innovative versus just getting individual funds for those projects individually. How by having this collaborative, you know, what is that added value? I
have a couple more questions, and then I promise that I'll. So this is more just clarifying the solicitation. So one, there was some discrepancies between the scoring criteria for the research and the engagement piece. I believe is on page 6. So at one point it said there would be a 65-35% split, and then another area it said 75-25% split. So
I'm glad you caught that. It's 65-35.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, we didn't change it everywhere, and we'll clean that up.
I'm sure it's hard to get these out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so another question that I had is there is a public access to research products, and so would this also include any data that is original data that's produced?
So the public access piece, there's kind of a couple pieces we have in there, right? So there's this public access is that because this is state-funded work, we don't want people who would like to look at your results having to pay for it, right? So that was that piece with the official journal text and things like that. The second part is that we ask that anything like data or findings or anything like that that isn't maybe peer review and published would go to OPR's ICART program so that we could include that in our clearinghouse of adaptation information.
Okay, so it sounds like data is not necessarily publicly available. Okay, Great. And then in the past performance section, it mentioned to highlight past contracts that we've had with state agencies, and it said to limit that to 3 that we would highlight. Is that?
I thought it said 3 years.
Oh, 3 years. Okay, so it's 3 years. And then it also mentioned in that past performance to talk about the program management. Now, is it for those past projects or is it for the proposal? For the
for the past performance, it really is just talking about, you know, how you manage those projects in the past. Yeah.
And who managed them and et cetera.
Right, and that you got things done on time and yeah.
Okay. Great. And then, so for specifically about the submission questionnaire, is there a way we can get that in an Excel format?
I think we can print it out. Yeah, she just wanted to know if they could get an Excel spreadsheet that had the questions so they could look at them versus just having to go on the site. And I think that's something
that we could fill it out and just have it ready for one.
Because it is in the solicitation. The actual questionnaire is attachment 1 in the thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I could see where it would help to have it in a way where you could put your questions in the cut and paste.
Get it ready.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that's something we can provide for you.
And then in the section 5 of the submission questionnaire, it discusses partnerships, and it says to list 5. So for centers, we will have more than 5.
So you also, yeah, so one of the things we wanted to do, like I was saying, the idea of the submission questionnaire was really to get some key data on all of the projects, like not just the awards, but just all of the projects. So that was a way we could do it, saying you have to have 1, and you could do up to 5 there. But then you have that partnership overview, and that's really where you can really list and give us a lot more information, a lot more qualitative information on how that partnership works and who are the key players, and maybe more than just a contact person. You might want to talk about, you know, different people within that partnership.
Okay, so it's fine. We'll just list the 5.
I would say the 5 key, right?
Some straws and who gets to be the 5. Okay.
Or the ones that are the most, you know, involved. Yeah.
And then it mentioned in the partnership overview there was a partnership dynamic template.
Did I say that? We were going to do that, and I thought I took it out, but I guess I missed. That's another one I missed.
Ignore that.
Yeah, because we didn't want to have it, again, it's this thing about being prescriptive versus providing a broad process that researchers are more used to versus all these templates like we tend to do with implementation grants. So, yeah, so that's something else we'll take out. You got all these things.
No.
Or next time I'm going to have you read it before I really...
And my last question is for also on the partnership overview. It's talking to list all the personnel involved and researchers. So for center proposals, we'll have a lot of people involved. And so do you just want the main people for our partners listed in that and explain their roles and dynamics, or literally everyone that's going to be funded under that?
I think any partner who is going to be receiving funding, any organization or institution, need to be listed, but I don't need to know about every grad student. And
okay, great. So it's more of like executive committee level, like so from all our partners, who's that person that's the key lead from each partnership and describing and listing their name and who's managing like the overall program, et cetera. So it's just main.
Yeah, or if like, for example, like if a role is facilitation, it's going to be a big part. You're going to do a lot of engagement and outreach, and you know, you have some key facilitators. You'd want to include that to kind of show the capacity you have to reach the different stakeholders or groups that you're trying to reach.
So it's not an exhaustive list of, okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Just a small spelling error on page 5. No, I'm not kidding. Tom Brooks from Berkeley Economic Advising and Research. First of all, it's a very challenging thing to bring focused research, specific research into a broader perspective, and so I kind of want to make an offer to the room. One of the big challenges that these projects will face is modeling the impact on disadvantaged communities in a consistent and coherent way, and we can't expect each research group to have that capability, and so one of the things that I'd like to offer basically to the room is that Berkeley Economic Advising Research, which does that modeling spatially, geographically, impact of different policies on disadvantaged communities, that's something we could offer to partner with any of the projects that are being presented. And that comes to my question. A capability like that is innovative in that it's a capability that's offered to a research project or to a policy organization. Is that something that would be possible to be made into a project, or is that something that we would offer, as I'm doing now, as a partner? In other words, could that possibly be a lead project?
I always want to say depends when it's about a project-specific thing, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it more offline later. But I think generally, if you have there's a special skill set that you see isn't being applied to the research already happening within climate research projects within the state, I think you could almost look at a suite of those and work with those researchers to kind of apply this. And I don't know if it would work in your case because I don't know enough about it, but I think that's a different way to think about it. I know that in a lot of these, we've done a lot of really good research projects that were really focused on transportation or vehicle miles traveled or something like that. And I think that, you know, again, going through that CalAdapt catalog of past projects, you might be able to find kind of a suite of projects that you could kind of pull back in and kind of do this added value again.
Right. So where we work mostly is on policy impact. So how will a policy impact disadvantaged communities in the future? And so in itself, it's important that that's done. Like I said, I don't think every project will have that capability within it, and so then we would be able to sort of plug into those as a partner, and that makes sense. Thank you very much for the workshop.
Dominguez with UC Davis. I have a quick question. I think I know the answer, but I want to ask. When you mentioned student fees, are you including non-resident student fees? Can we cover non-resident student fees with grants?
I will have Blake check into that to make sure, but generally I would say yes, we usually do 10. I know usually in research programs they will pay for non-student fees, and this is state money, so not federal money or anything where that might be an issue. But yeah, I think that just generally that's something we'd have to look further into to make sure that we'll pay out of state fees as well as just, you know.
So when would you know that?
We're going to do a fact sheet on the 20th. Okay. And so we're saying any questions we receive from now through the 12th, we're going to put into a FAQ. And so we'll make sure you have all of those answers. Thanks. Sorry.
Hi, Jim Thorne from UC Davis. I have a couple of questions. The first is with regards to outreach to communities. There's a tangled web that we researchers weave, right? And so those our partners could be anything from a federal agency to a state agency to a local community. And I wonder what SGC is thinking in terms of are there preferred groups for that, or we just map it out relative to our project?
Yes, I agree. I think that, having a $4 million multi-institutional collaborative partnership project versus one PI $100,000 project are very different animals and would be treated very differently. And I think it really does depend on the research topic and how you approach it, and really looking at traditional and non-traditional partners. So for something like, let's say you're working with one federal agency on a water issue or something like that, maybe just looking at some of the governance structures like a water agency or something, or just kind of broadening that traditional thing and talking in your narrative about how that's innovative in engagement in the type of research that you're doing. So we don't expect everybody to go run down and do have like 5 community-based organizations and, some advocacy groups and everything in every project. It would just depend on how that works and really showing the value to that and how it is innovative and different.
Thanks for that. My other question has to do with linking the future to ongoing programs. And so coming out of the 4th Climate Vulnerability Assessment will be a whole series of future projections that are targeting California with regards to their climate. And so, but many of the adaptation and mitigation programs are, we're in the here and now, and to what extent is it going to be a criteria, or is SGC interested in seeing how a particular proposal says, here's how we're going to be affecting future emissions, and kind of linking it into these projections that we see coming down the road?
Yeah, I think it's important. It's going to be kind of hard just because of the timing. So all of the fourth assessment information won't come out until after your submissions are due. So a lot of it you won't know. But I think there's a lot that we do know, like around oceans and OPC's work already on sea level rise and things like that. So I think that with this program, which is the only one I can really talk about, I can't talk about bigger, but yeah, we definitely want to see, and that's one of the reasons we talked about aligning projects with the work that the state is doing, the projections and trajectories that we're looking through, that we've kind of been pushing a different way, or the scenarios that we've chosen that maybe other, like federal work or something may not be right on target with the way we're doing things. I don't want to get too specific, but that to really look at the work that we're doing, and that's why I talked about the scoping plan, and I talked about Safeguarding California, and some of these things we continually put out a lot of policy documents that really I think is helping people to understand the direction we're going. And when we talk about adaptation, we really do talk about a trajectory, not an objective, understanding that we really don't know for sure what's going to happen, but we are continuously changing that trajectory based on the latest science. And so the more you can talk about that, I think especially in the goals section, where we're saying how are you aligning with our goals, and I think that that would be helpful to really make that connection and then in the narrative. So,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Jim Hawley with Berkeley Lab. Thank you. And thanks for everything you've done to make this, to get this moving, and certainly to have this workshop today. Had a number of questions we got from various researchers, so I'll just go through them. You very helpfully used for the different institutions template agreements, for example, for UC, in the case of the National Labs, for the DOE, DGS, pre-negotiated terms and conditions, and you point, I think, on page 24 to reference that. I guess the question I have is if there is wording in the solicitation that might be ambiguous or slightly at variance with those terms and conditions, are we safe to assume that the terms and conditions relevant, for example, to the national labs would apply to a national lab?
So with that, we did say when we talked about model agreements, because we have them with UC, with CSU, and with the national labs, that we would use them without negotiation, which would mean we would use the language. But I will be double checking on that. So again, any responses you can have if you see if there's something different with what we say in the solicitation versus what's in the model agreement, just please let us know so that we can clarify. But we will just get a overall decision from, our contracts people on. My understanding is that the model agreement would take precedence over information solicitation on contract terms. I mean, it's not going to be on, like the project stuff, but on the terms of the contract.
Thank you. So I got a question on research areas. I think you've been very clear that a proposal can address multiple research areas. The question I got was the specific topic issues that are raised within each topic area. If a proposal is covered by the general research area, but is not mentioned in the specific topic question, would it be disqualified or disfavored, or should we really be focusing on things that are in the research question?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. The reason that we went from, in the first iteration of the plan, we just had the general areas. And one of the reasons that we kind of narrowed them by these questions was because we heard, well, if researchers don't know what you're looking for, they're not even going to apply, because this could be anything and they won't know if it does apply or doesn't. So we did try and narrow it. So what I would say at this point is I would really, as much as I could, try and integrate at least one of the questions. You don't have to look at all of the questions by any means, but if there is a question that you can work off of under a priority area, that I think would be really key.
Thank you. And a research project rather than a partnership have sub-recipients?
Yes.
Is there a model to follow for listing personnel who will work on the project but are not yet hired, such as students and postdocs? And what if personnel change over the course of the project, say, for example, because someone leaves?
Right. So generally, with budgeting, what we would recommend is that you use payroll titles and not specific people for non-senior personnel. So if you have grad students or something, you can, they're a grad student 4 or something, and not list the specific person's name, because that tends to have a salary amount. And so with the budgets, it's always really important to know that you can't exceed the salaries that you're putting in. So if you don't have that person hired, I really wouldn't start with the bottom amount for that person. Really think through what you're going to have to pay somebody and use that as your...
And then there was a question about your definition of equipment, which is disallowed, and materials and supplies that are allowed. Any color that you would want to add to that?
It was hard for us because one of the things we've really been trying to talk about is we really did want to do a number of projects, and we didn't want to have like 3 or 4 big projects that just had these big pieces of equipment versus getting a lot of money out there to the actual work. So I think what I'd say with supplies and expenses, if you already have equipment or you can kind of rent or use equipment, that's fine. It's just that we don't want to do the upfront cost for buying a significant piece of equipment.
Got it. Must all travel be detailed in the proposal, or can unplanned domestic travel be approved by the project manager?
I think, I'll let you go first.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. I'm trying to...
Must all travel be detailed in the proposal, or can unplanned domestic travel be approved by the project manager? Is that something we should work out with them?
Yeah, you do not have to list all travel that is anticipated. I think there is some language in here that says we don't allow out-of-country travel. I'm not sure if we allow out-of-state, or is it just... Okay, yeah, we can clarify a little bit more on the travel, but yeah, you don't have to list all the anticipated travel.
And I would just agree that if you're talking about the type of travel, like, we plan to go to 3 symposiums or something, that you're kind of giving us an overall of what your travel budget consists of. You don't actually have to say where you're going.
So let's say a proposal has several parts, and you like a couple and you really don't want to fund a couple. It sounded to me like you reserve the right to fund part of a proposal and not others, but is it an all or nothing kind of thing, or would you reserve the right to fund, say, 2 out of 3 of the elements of the proposal?
Wow. I don't know. I think that's a really good question that hopefully we'll kind of get back to a little bit. I need to check with Randall a little bit on his thoughts of that. I would say generally in past programs, we really have looked at funding the entire project. We really haven't cherry-picked pieces of it. I think that it really, the whole idea of being competitive is, because I've worked a lot on planning grants, and people will come back later and want to change their scope of work after they've gotten the money, and I always have to go back and say, would it have still been competitive? And so I think we want to look at the totality of each proposal.
Very helpful. Let's see. Well, I think this is maybe, it's talking about next year, would you consider adding funds to extend or expand projects in new areas with, say, for example, the governor's requested $35 million, and I don't know if that's something you can comment on at this point.
I think what I can comment on is that, yes, the governor has proposed about $35 million for technology deployment, which looks like it would fit well, and I think SGC is actually called out as the implementer or the administrator of that program, should it happen, which it hasn't. It's got to go through a lot of iterations. So any money that we would get through the California Climate Change Investment Program, anything we would get, we would use the research investment program or plan as our guide. And yeah, if the money is looked at that way, we would do it. We also will have a change in administration. So I think we'll have, so in January a new council would come on board, and so that would be huge on how we decide which of those 5 areas we would be investing in. Yeah.
Let's see, I think you mentioned that subrecipients can be outside of the state. Can they be outside of the United States if a payment is made to a U.S. bank and taxed?
Yes, I think that one of the things, and this is Manuel Pastor, who is one of our council members, had said we want to have the best experts on these projects, and if that person is in, Denmark or something, that wouldn't be a senior person, but like maybe somebody who is doing some special work. So that would be my caveat, is not for senior personnel. That really should be within those lead institutions. Otherwise, yeah.
And then one last question, discussion of land use. There was in the research area 3, there were a number of questions that focus on infill. I think the last 2 focus on land conservation and management generally, including forest and agriculture and watershed restoration. I guess the question that was asked to me was, if a project involves land use but does not involve infill, but it finishes the last 2, would it be seen as competitive? Or like if and I think you answered this question earlier, if it just addresses 1 or 2 of those questions, does that make it as competitive as the others?
Yeah. So absolutely. I think, again, it's only one question. For me personally, like infill is great, but most of our communities aren't set up yet for that. So I think it's really important to look at suburban and rural questions on land use as well as kind of that urban context of it. We want to look at everything. Whenever you do one of these projects, and I know you were involved in the research plan when we did the roundtables, people will read our questions and think that either I have to do it all, everything under there, or, it doesn't cover what I want to do and you should have more. So should we, it's that lump and split kind of question. So that's why I said those were the questions to just narrow who would feel like they could apply, because the questions don't really intersect with the research they're trying to do. But we don't have an expectation that you're going to answer every question under one of the areas. You can pick and choose. You might see that there's one in vulnerability that's really relatable, and there's something on land conservation or sequestration. And so you can pick and choose your questions within those 4 areas.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Tom.
Baby from California Trout. Hi. Just wanted to acknowledge how important getting this money on the ground to do all this work is, and thank you for making that happen. You sort of answered this question with maybe a little bit more clarity. Do you, to the best of your knowledge, think this will be a repeat opportunity, and should we structure our work to think, do all phases now make it as big a project as we can, or would you advise, and I know I can't hold you to it, some kind of incremental focus? Yeah.
So I honestly don't know. I mean, when you look at what has been funded through this, it depends on the legislature, so you guys have more influence on that than I do as far as what they decide to do. I think, though, when you're looking at how much to put, you have the 3-year limit. but you also are competing with other programs. So I really think it's like, what do you think is going to get evaluated the highest? And so if you're going to do all of it, will people think that's as reasonable and as like meaningful engagement as there is if you just did a phase of it? So I think that's for you guys to think about, but in that context of being competitive.
Got it. And then the other, so we're part of teams, clearly, with state universities, a few different state universities. When you talk about past experience and the biographical sketches, it's of personnel. So does that limit it to the university personnel or to all the team, the key senior team members?
Yeah, I would say any senior person that's really has a significant role or responsibility in the project, so it doesn't just have to be UC for the bio sketches or UC or lead applicants. So yeah, but with past performance, because it's the lead applicant, I think it's the idea of like if your organization had done a state research project in the past. Yeah. You don't have to list that because that's really about project management, and that would be the lead applicant. So you wouldn't have to list anything that any of the partners had done in the past 3 years with the state. It would be helpful on the partnership just so we could see that you've already worked on research, but that past performance really is looking to make sure that the applicants have a good performance record with spending state funds.
The administrative capacity of the research institution. Thank you.
You're welcome.
As a reminder, please speak into the mic when you're asking questions. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Alan Fuchs, and I'm from Cal State Bakersfield, and I'm the new director of our Energy Center, so I'm new to the state. So this has been a very interesting workshop, and the questions have been very illuminating for me, too. So my question is, when I look at your priorities, we fit in with many of them, and so I need to kind of figure out which direction that we should go. So I've spent some time looking at your web page, and I've looked at your objectives, and it's also been very helpful looking at your past year's annual reports. What is the strategy that I could use, or maybe let me ask, this has really been discussion has been pretty agnostic with respect to topic areas. Can you give examples maybe of areas that have been well-funded or that have received a lot of attention, and what would be my path moving forward in establishing what that makes sense? Will there be an opportunity for discussions after today's session or email in the future? Because I live a few hours away, so email would be useful.
So I really can't give you specific examples because this is the first program and we've never done anything like this before. And we really are reaching out to all of our member agencies like the Energy Commission who have done research projects and seeing how we can fit in and what's going there. I think, though, that rather than looking at the council itself and the work that we've done, really looking at the governor's climate goals, the 6 pillars, and really looking at CalAdapt and the catalog of research that's been around climate and seeing, what has been done, what are the questions that need to be answered around things like, we have the new zero net vehicle kind of goal that we have. We have the 375 regional targets on mitigation. There's those sorts of things. I think that the California Air Resources Board scoping plan is a really good document to think about and review, and part of that is the vibrant communities and places piece that really talks about land use and transportation in context with the scoping plan. Again, if adaptation is that area, like it sounds like you want to go with clean energy, something like the EPIC program and the work that they're doing would be really helpful to kind of see the direction of where we're going on clean energy. Adaptation, again, the Safeguarding California strategy is really key in how we do things. And I'm happy to chat with you offline about it. And I would also suggest you look at Appendix B. We did put this list of laws and policies and documents that the state's already working on. And I think that would really help to inform people as they're thinking through their projects.
As a follow-up to that, will you accept emails up until the date of submission? Is there a blackout period?
Yeah, and anytime you can just email me and say I'd love to schedule a time to talk, And we will both, and I think we'll be involved in that, as well as, if it's a contract question, we can pull Blake in, or Suresh if it's a question about the online application system. And I do want to just recommend y'all register and play with it a little bit early rather than waiting until the last so it's helpful. Yeah.
So I've gotten the signal that we have a lot of questions online, so I think we'll take, maybe if someone has one more burning question in the room, and then we'll go to questions online, and we can maybe come back. And we'll also be here for about an hour afterwards to answer any of your specific questions as well, and we'll be putting out a frequently asked questions sheet as well. So.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ignacio Fernandez from Climate Resolve. We're a nonprofit based in Los Angeles. So my question has to do with the management of the projects. We're envisioning a couple of projects that would involve 2 or 3 academic institutions, right? So I want to find out about how much room there is to separate the roles of the PI with the project manager. Because in both situations, we're envisioning that the academic institutions are very specific on their field of research, right? So we want to take, as we've done in the past in other projects, take away from their hands all the communications with the SGC, all the managerial role, payroll, coordination, et cetera, all of that. So us as a nonprofit could be the main point of contact, where here is a little bit attached to the PI role.
So just generally, so the lead applicant or the research institution that will be serving that purpose will be our contact contractually, and they'll have to send us invoices and stuff like that, and that really does have to go through the lead institution. We do provide the option in the questionnaire of a project manager, and that for us will be once you receive an award, we have an orientation meeting, and that's where we'll really kind of work through who does what roles and responsibilities. So that's definitely something that, based on who the PI is, if they want the project manager to take a more significant role, the PI is really responsible for making sure that the actual research findings and things like that are academically sound and that sort of thing. So because that's really our first, this is research investments. It's not, we want to do the engagement, but the research is really important, and so we need to have one person with the responsibility and authority to keep that on track. But we do understand, because that used to be my job at a university, is that project management and coordination, and that's a really key piece to keep in the loop, and so definitely that can be a major role.
Okay, and so I think we'll go to some of the questions we've gotten through WebEx now.
Okay, this first one is regarding the requirement that admin costs should not exceed 5% of the total budget. Is there a total somewhere of what exactly counts as admin costs?
Okay, I didn't know if you were. So the 5% admin cost was in the legislation. And that really refers to state admin costs, so that's the amount of money we can spend as the state of California in support costs. With your programs, there's the 25% indirect costs, and then we also say that if there are admin costs that are really specific, like a project manager who's really focused in on that, that is an eligible cost within your budget.
And for the eligibility requirement, does the requirement to be in the UC system, national labs, et cetera, only apply to the lead institution or all of the institutions in the group proposal?
So that requirement is only for the lead applicant and their partners. I think it's on page 12 or something. There's a graphic that shows that any organization or other academic institution or even a consulting business or something that lead applicant wants to use as part of the team, they can all be subrecipients, but the lead applicant has to be one of those 4 institution types.
In the beginning, you mentioned sites referring. You mentioned sites to refer to for seeing past related work. Could you repeat what these sites were again? One of them was Caltrans, right?
Oh, I think what I had talked about was there are different research programs that state agencies like the Energy Commission have, and so the first place is cal/adapt.org, and it isn't, I think Appendix B is the one on policies and laws and backup information. But CalAdapt has a lot, I think over 400 climate change research projects that have been done to date within the state. And then there's things like the EPIC program at the Energy Commission that has a catalog of their past projects. For Caltrans, there's the Division of Innovation and Research, and they also have a catalog of their past projects, and ARB has a research division that also does that. So the CalAdapt, we try and bring them all into that program. Not every department does kind of submit their stuff into CalAdapt, but for those, that's a good place to start. And then if you're looking for something like transportation and you want to make sure you have it all, you might want to go to Caltrans, or for, adaptation, you might want to go to CAL FIRE and see if there's been any work on, different ecological issues.
Could you clarify how you want meaningful engagement to be demonstrated in the proposal? In addition to the project narrative, could this be demonstrated via letters of commitment and jointly developing the proposal?
So yeah, the project narrative I think is a really key place, and like I'd mentioned earlier, to really, as you create your narrative and you've talked about the technical components of it, kind of going back and folding in how the engagement and partnerships will work is really important. We also allow you to do that partnership overview where you could really talk about your partners and how you'll use them to engage. I don't know what the last part of that was about in the proposal process. Yeah.
Could letters of commitment demonstrate meaningful engagement?
Right. So letters of commitment, we call it letters of support, and you can provide up to 7 of them. I think it would be really helpful if it includes partners who are going to be doing engagement and can kind of demonstrate their capacity and their past performance of engaging the stakeholders that you're looking at. That would be really helpful.
Can a proposed project be a project that has already begun and will continue afterwards?
Possibly, it depends. I think if like you've done a project on something and this is kind of a outcrop of something that couldn't get funded, like I was saying with maybe vehicle miles traveled, and you've done a lot of work on vehicle miles traveled, and you want to do some behavior information or something that you weren't able to fund. So it's almost like a new phase of the project, or there's multiple phases or themes around what you're doing that, yeah, it would be great. We want to see past research kind of built on in a way. So if it's that, but if it's just like you already have some money and you just want to do more of the same, that's kind of duplicative, and that may not work as much.
Could you speak more about how you want to see the proposal support disadvantaged communities and advance equitable outcomes? You mentioned you're not expecting direct alignment. Could you expand on that?
I think that in some situations it would. You would have some projects that would really be focused on that issue specifically, or how different things like infill development would affect disadvantaged communities, just gentrification, vulnerability and adaptation, those sorts of things. So in some situations you would. In other situations it might be a really important research question that you really can't immediately tie into a specific disadvantaged community. But by thinking about that question and really working through some of the key aspects of it over time, that would help when you get into translation and when you get into, when you get into looking at those issues within disadvantaged communities, just like other communities. So I think one good question is like vulnerability, and you might want to look at just generalized vulnerability. It may not be focused on a disadvantaged community, but a lot of the things that are in your vulnerability assessment also are very similar and could easily be applied to disadvantaged communities. So that's the sort of thing that you might not be focused on a disadvantaged community, but the things that you're working with would have applications within those communities.
Disadvantaged communities are commonly resource limited. Will the SGC entertain outreach engagement proposals that recommend local stipends or similar as means to incentivize participation by DACs and similar?
The short answer is yes. We feel like that's why we have this really diverse group of partnerships that you could bring in a community-based organization who do a lot of those types of facilitation and bringing folks together. And you also have kind of the supply and miscellaneous costs where if you're working with a really good community-based partner, that's something you could put into your project.
In terms of impacts on disadvantaged communities, do the benefits have to be climate related? Could you benefit them other than air quality improvements?
Yes. So if you look at 535 and 1550, it really is about there are a lot of co-benefits other than air quality issues or, reduction in emissions. So similarly, that when you're looking at co-benefits through this program, it can be anything from health equity, it could be workforce development. There could be just a lot of different things that really are going to benefit a community.
Would a research project be considered responsive to this call if it focused on reducing specific climate or impact uncertainty, given that it would, in general, benefit vulnerable communities? Or does it only become responsive if the project includes some direct interaction with vulnerable communities to use the research results?
That depends. I mean, again, that's kind of a question that would be really great if you emailed me and I could talk with you about the specifics of it, because there's some questions that are really key that you might not be ready to pilot or translate into a community, and there's other ones that really we're at a place where translation and informing stakeholders really is needed. So that's something you'd have to kind of be able to justify in your project narrative.
Would it be better to wait until the fourth assessment comes out and extend the schedule for the grant to give us more time?
No, I'd love to do it, but the council has decided they do want to get the funding out now, and they really feel like with the research we've already done, there's still a lot of work that we can do, and that the fourth assessment will be out before the next round would be awarded, and then hopefully, next summer we could really include that information.
To clarify the separate document for collaborations and affiliations of the biographical sketch, the system will allow for a separate document with no page limit for this piece of the sketch?
Yes. The only limit is 2 gigabytes as the total size of the document, which is with all documents within the system, but we did not put a page limit on it because I guess there's some real critical issues about collaborations and affiliations and non-disclosure and conflict of interest, so we want to make sure that you have the space you need to really spell that out.
Can you clarify about how direct GHG emissions reductions should be facilitated by vulnerability, resilience-oriented proposals, or the essentially need a separate component to qualify?
So, yeah, it's really, I know it's hard with adaptation to look specifically at facilitating GHG emission reductions. And because of where the money comes and because of how the legislation is written, it's something we have to include. And so that's why we said rather than being really quantitative, we really like you to take a long view of adaptation and its relationship to facilitating GHG emissions. And that's all. I mean, I think we're going to be really liberal with reading those reviews. Like I say, it doesn't have to be quantitative. It could really talk about over time sequestration and some other issues that an adaptation or resiliency strategy might include or might benefit.
Do project applications also need to complete the partnership overview section?
As I recall, and I'm looking to make sure because I think I have the wrong thing here. Let me look. I think the partnership overview is optional for the projects and is mandatory for the partnership grants. But we will just double check that and we'll ensure it's on the FAQ. But that was my intention when I wrote this.
It seems like several of the priority research themes, especially the theme one on vulnerability, could be very well addressed without at all facilitating the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in California.
Again, the funding, the investment funds we receive for this are from cap and trade auction proceeds, and so we have to comply with ARB funding guidelines, which includes facilitation of the reduction of GHG emissions. So that's something that's really beyond our purview as a program. We have to comply with the ARB's guidelines.
In section 1 and 2 of the questionnaire, there are 2 spots for project objectives, one with a 500 character limit, one with a 2,000 character limit. Also 2 project description sections, one with 2,000 characters. Are these the same questions?
So again, with the solicitation, and I probably should go through this in a little more detail, we are using VWR's grants online system. It's a really great system. One of the issues with it are section 1 and 2 are mandatory for any project in the system. So that's not something that we're asking, it's something that they're asking. I think if it's in 1 and 2, a lot of the stuff in section 2 will automatically populate when you put it in section 1. So you won't have to put it in again. When you get to section 3, which is the project summary, we do have an abstract that's much larger, and we have really specific information we're looking for, so it's not just a description. There's a little bit more. And I don't know if there's another place that asks for a project description. I do know, though, in sections 1 and 2, most of that isn't required information, but those things that are, you do need to put in, and when you get to section 2, you'll see a lot of it just self-populates if it's already asked you that same question in section 1.
Under research partnerships category, what is meant by a broad focus on the research priority areas? For example, in priority area 1, would interdisciplinary research on multiple dynamics surrounding a specific climate impact, i.e. extreme heat, be suitable?
It could be, yeah. I think the idea was rather than having a specific question or question theme like you would with a smaller project, we'd like to see, you could take something like extreme heat and look at the different project research areas and kind of combine them in a way that makes it really comprehensive versus just really focusing in on 1 or 2 questions.
I'm going to actually just jump in and ask if how many more people people in the room have questions, if just a raise of hands. No one else in the room. Okay, that's great.
With respect to the past performance criteria, can you please clarify whether you will consider the lead PI as an individual, or would you consider the past performance of additional key personnel playing large roles in the project?
Yeah, I think that's really up to the lead applicant. I didn't want people feeling like if you were with like a UC campus that you had to list everything that UC campus was doing, that you could look at your department or your division or your key personnel, you know, however you see that really demonstrating what your past performance is. So I would say that, yes, it doesn't have to just be the PI. You could have senior personnel who have done work. That would be helpful. But I don't want to, like with, I know ITS is here, I don't want to see every project ITS has done over the last 3 years with all their institutions to show past performance. I just like to see things that are specific to whatever the lead applicant is doing.
If the lead PI has no direct experience with state agencies, can past performance be demonstrated? Oh, I think I went.
Yeah, so I'll just say that past performance, we're not looking for you to prove that you've had past work with the state. We just want to know that if you have worked with the state before, that you've been productive. And so it's not like you're not going to get more points or get a higher review because it's not, it's actually happening in phase 3. It's just almost a checkoff that we know that you can do project management, and we know that if you have done work with us in the past, it's been successful, or you've delivered what you said you would deliver.
Could you please clarify the statements you made about the statement of work and deliverables? Do you envision that these proposals will describe topic areas but not actually detail a timeline of deliverables?
No, I will clarify, because what I meant was your project narrative will really talk a lot about what you're trying to achieve and how and all of that. We see the scope of work as kind of a depiction of that. That's really pulling out any milestones, any deliverables, and the timeline, you know, of those milestones. So that a project manager, and especially a contracts person, can easily translate what you're trying to do in your narrative and say that, yes, these invoices are allowable costs and things like that. So it's just like a scope of work in most things where you're going to have, you're going to break things down by tasks, or phases for some people. You're going to, within those, say, you know, what are the deliverables at the end? What are the milestones that you need to achieve in doing that work? Those sorts of things, and then provide us a timeline so we can see how all these things are going to work together.
You also want past performance statements from sub-applicants and project partners?
No, this is really about the lead applicant and that they've successfully done work in the past.
Will proposals that actually directly reduce GHG as part of their research outcomes and result in important research that will greatly enable future climate action to be implemented to be more successful, competitive than just achieving the research result?
It was more like a statement. Was there a question?
Just asking, will it be more competitive if it's both?
Yeah, again, I think it is, you know, really those research and investment areas, and those questions are really looking at the technical merit around those questions is what's really key. I can't tell you what's going to be more or less competitive because I don't know what the suite of submissions are going to look like. But yeah, you know, the reduction of carbon emissions was specifically spelled out in the legislation, so it is important.
Contamination is a serious issue in many disadvantaged communities. Does remediation work fit in this RFP?
I don't know. Again, because this is research, if you can show remediation as, you know, I'm just personally trying and figure out how those would intersect. But so you'd have to justify how doing something like remediation or something like that really fits into, you know, a research approach and methodology, and all of those kinds of pieces fit. This really isn't an implementation project, so while it sounds like great work, we might have you work with Cal Recycle or some other groups that have different programs that might be more appropriate. I just don't know. It depends.
With regard to past performance projects, does state funding include funds from UC Regents and other agencies?
I would say it would be with a state of California agency, for example, something in the executive branch of the state, like the institutions I've talked about before, Department of Ed. For UC and CSU, it's not necessarily. If you want to, you can, but again, I just want to say this isn't to like bump you up. It's just to make sure that you've been successful if you have worked with us in the past, especially SGC member agencies, so you're not going to get a better, we're not going to look at you higher if you've got a bunch of successful past performances. We just want to make sure that if you've worked with us, it was successful in the past.
If a project meets the threshold requirement of reducing GHG emissions by saving energy, would it be disfavored on the grounds that the EPIC program also sponsors energy efficiency research?
Again, not necessarily. I think if it's very duplicative of what something like EPIC would ask for, then we would suggest that you apply to the EPIC program. What we're trying to do is fill in those gaps. So maybe it has some of the aspects that an EPIC proposal would have, but maybe it does some other things. And you really have to talk about exactly that. While this is very similar to what EPIC funds, here's how it's innovative and novel and different, and how it's adding value to what that program is investing in.
Regarding policy considerations on Figure 7 on page 17, it is unclear if sub-criteria weights should have been defined in the solicitation or will be defined at a later date. Could you clarify on these sub-criteria weights?
So again, we don't know what policy criteria we'll get until we get those evaluated projects that have went through the technical review process. So this is phase 3 of the process, so we're taking the best scored ones and we're looking at them to make sure that we have a diverse and comprehensive suite of projects that really cover what the solicitation talks about. So again, let's say we had the 10 highest scoring projects were all very similar in the type of research that they did. We might want to look at other projects that are doing very different things that need to be done. Or let's say that there were 1 or 2 institutions that got all of the highest scores. We might want to make sure that other institutions receive funds as well. So it's that sort of thing that we don't know, but we were trying to look at the kind of universe of what we might need to consider to ensure that we're meeting the program objectives and the council's objectives and creating the best suite of projects we can with these funds.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Does anyone else in the room have any other questions? I think we already established that no, but okay. Well, thank you very much. And once again, please do send questions to the research@sgc.ca.gov email address if you have them. And we're happy to respond to any specific questions that you have on projects or community engagement or any of the other topics that we've covered today. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, and just really quickly before, because Sharish was just looking at the section 1 and 2 of the questionnaire, and all that stuff about the project descriptions, those were they're not required questions. So you wouldn't have to any of the optional questions in section 1 and 2 around project information does not need to be answered. It's just the project name. And then you go down to the amount requested and geographic information, but everything else is optional. So don't fill out the optional questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
So thanks for coming.